the Post Office fault.
Minister Freeman.
Thank you very much, Dame Angela, for the chance to serve under your chairmanship today. And could I congratulate members for their contributions today and the honourable member opposite for raising this. I am here with apologies from the Small Business Minister, the member for Sutton and Cheam, who's called into the House on primary legislation elsewhere. But I have to say it is a chance I relish to respond on behalf of the Department of Business, having myself experienced in my constituency the appalling injustice that the sub-postmasters suffered. And in one village in my constituency, Gresson Hall, I saw the misery, the family disruption, the hell, colleagues have referred to, that the sub-postmasters were put through in a frankly disgraceful episode of institutional contempt for the little guy, if I can put it like that, at the bottom of the system. And I'm very pleased today that, as honourable members have remarked, we are announcing through a written ministerial statement, and there'll be an oral statement subject to the Speaker tomorrow, in which we will set out the government's commitment to fully fund the HSS scheme and the losses for those who have not yet been compensated. Yeah, happily give it.
I'm very grateful. You raise
Mr.
a very
Hollingbrooke.
fair point, but so does my honourable friend, the member for North Durham. This scheme excludes those that took part in group litigation. It is entirely unfair, unjust. Lee Castleton, not one of my constituents, but somebody I've tried to help through a third party, he got £28,000 in compensation. He lost over £400,000. It is simply unfair. It cannot persist with this route for compensation.
Minister Freeman.
Well, thank you, my honourable friend, for that intervention. Obviously, my colleague in the Department of Business is the lead minister on this, and I will raise that point with him. For the record in a moment, just want to make clear what has happened, and those who did settle have a settlement. We're tackling today those who weren't subject to a settlement, but he makes an important point. This must be fair, must be seen to be fair, and I wanted to start, Dame Angela, by just echoing the government's support for the point about culture. It is absolutely vital that the painful and difficult lessons from this disgraceful saga are properly learned, and let the message go forth from this dispatch box that we expect the Post Office to tackle that culture change properly. I'm delighted that there is a culture change programme, 2 new non-exec directors. But this is not a tick box exercise. This is a serious commitment. An organisation wholly owned by the taxpayer delivers properly and learns the lessons from this disgraceful saga. And I would, from my point of view, I dealt with this issue when I was a minister in this department in the coalition in 2015. What I saw seemed to me to be an institutional obfuscation, institutional defence of injustice, and all of those who conspired in that should hang their heads in shame. And the honourable member opposite mentions a law firm. I would just signal that some lawyers have stepped up to the mark on this, and in particular, Patrick Green, QC at Henderson Chambers, who worked pro bono to help many of the sub-postmasters, Neil Hudgell at Hudgell Solicitors and Freets, who did tremendous work speaking up for those who didn't have a voice. And it's only because of the bravery of those sub-postmasters and their lawyers that we're where we are today. Of course, it is good news that we've announced that funding. I don't want to focus on that, though, today, because the Minister should rightly, he's campaigned hard on it, and he will speak to the House tomorrow. But I just wanted, Dame Angela, to set the record straight for those watching or reading this later in terms of where we are today. As everyone here will be aware, the Post Office introduced that Horizon scheme in early 2000 and subsequently recorded shortfalls in cash at Post Office branches, which the Post Office then blamed on sub-postmasters. Completely unfairly, it subsequently turned out, and it resulted in horrific suffering. Not just the losses for the small business, in terms of the small businesses that sub-postmasters are running, but the family losses, the divorces, the depression, the mental health, the anxiety, and not to mention also in many rural areas, the loss of a facility that is crucial to rural communities. Many were sent to prison. This is a disgrace, an absolute disgrace, and it's very important that the lessons are learnt properly and that the culture that conspired to allow that to happen is seriously changed. In 2017, a group litigation order was brought against Post Office by the 555 postmasters. The postmasters won 2 landmark trials in 2019 and reached a settlement with the Post Office for £57.75 million. And those court cases and subsequent cases in the appeal courts have demonstrated just how wrong the Post Office was to behave in the way that it did. It has apologised and is now working to overhaul its culture to address the findings of Mr Justice Fraser. Yeah, very quick.
They had to settle because they ran out of money. And my constituent, Tom Brown, got £20,000 in compensation. He paid £86,000 back to the post office. Can he tell me where that £86,000 is and why Tom isn't entitled to getting that back?
Minister Freeman.
Well, the honourable member makes a really important point. I will raise that specifically with the Minister, and perhaps he could address it in his statement tomorrow. And I wanted just to, on behalf of the government, express our deep sympathies to those sub-postmasters who've been referenced here today, to Tom and to those in Scotland and those in York and those around the country. This is an injustice that urgently needs to be tackled very quickly.
Alistair Carmichael.
To demonstrate the change of culture and good faith would be for Post Office actually to start the whole process from the beginning again, instead of insisting that people who have made applications under a flawed process will have to see them through to the end and get less than they are entitled to as a consequence.
Minister Freeman.
I understand the point that the honourable member is making. Let me just include, for those on the record, the history of how we got to this situation today. As part of that settlement in 2019, the Post Office committed to putting in place a scheme for those postmasters who were not part of that settlement and who didn't have criminal convictions related to the Horizon scheme. And the historic Shortfall scheme, HSS, was set up to meet that commitment. It's an important step. It opened in May 2020 and closed to applications later that year. The Post Office, to be fair, did make significant efforts, quite rightly, to reach out to all postmasters, 7,000 individual letters to current postmasters and a further 20,000 to former postmasters. I think it's fair to say the Post Office was quite surprised. I don't think any of us in this room will have been by the response, and the scheme received over 2,300 eligible applications. I hear the points that the honourable member have made opposite about the nature of that form, and I haven't myself, because I'm not the lead minister on this, looked at it, but he makes an important point which I will raise with the minister. The form needs to make clear to people what they're entitled to and not discourage them from understanding their rights, which are long overdue in terms of being enforced. That HSS meant that the cost of the scheme went beyond, and that response, beyond what the Post Office could afford, and the Post Office turned to the government as its 100% shareholder. And my honourable friend, the Minister, the member for Sutton Cheam, has set out that the government will provide sufficient financial support to Post Office to ensure that the historical shortfall scheme can proceed properly and that those people are fully compensated. I understand that raises a question about the fairness for those who settled out of court, which is a point that the Minister will no doubt want to address. The Post Office is contributing from its own funds. Decisions on application,
£1,000,000, the estimate. 2,300 applications, that's £130,000 each. Lee Castleton got 28,000. My honourable friend's constituency got 20,000. That just cannot be right.
Minister Freeman.
My honourable friend makes a powerful point, which I'm sure the Minister will want to address. One of the things I wanted to mention is the speed. When the government steps up and says, we are now going to fully fund this, it is incumbent on the Post Office to pull its finger out and get on with processing more quickly. And I understand the intention is that all of these will be claimed, vast majority within months by the spring. All of them will be claimed within the year. Long overdue that is. Let me just close by picking up a couple of the points that honourable members have made. The point about the board, I will ask the Minister to write to the honourable member for Orkney and Shetland on. The honourable member for Strangford raised the same points about his constituents, which I wanted to put on record. The member for North Durham, let me share the government's apologies to Tom Brown and others in his constituency, and I take the point about lessons for ministers and lessons for the department as well. And my honourable friend, the member for Thirsk and Waltham, makes a very good point. We cannot have unaccountable Quangos marking their own homework, and there are really important lessons here about accountability. Let me just close by saying I think it is good news that the government is making a commitment to fully fund this scheme, but there are other issues that still need to be sorted to make clear this, A, never happens again, and B, that the injustices are properly resolved.
The question is that this House has considered the Post Office historical